Delivered ballots could make a difference in states like Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan, where they had to arrive by last night. Meanwhile, the counting continues tonight. Pennsylvania will count ballots if they arrive by 5 p.m. Friday and were sent on time. A recount is mandatory if the margin between candidates is 0.5% or less. President Trump has already requested between candidates is 0.5% or less. President Trump has already requested a recount in Wisconsin, which requires a margin of 1% or less. Arizona requires a recount if the margin is less than or equal to 0.1%. Michigan requires a recount if the margin is 2,000 votes or less. Republican election legal analyst Matt Sanderson says recounts are normal and do not suggest cheating.
This may take a little bit longer than everyone would like it to, but remember, a slow process is a careful process. It's not a fraudulent process.
159 million people voted in this election, in person and by mail. 66% of voters cast a ballot. That's the highest rate in a century. Lester?
Tom, thanks. And we've seen record turnout in this election, nearly 160 million Americans. And in battlegrounds, especially black and Latino voters appear to be making a big difference. More on that beginning with Kerry Sanders in Florida.
President Trump's supporters in Miami's Little Havana celebrating after the president snagged an even bigger win in Florida than in 2016, largely thanks to strong support among Latinos, nearly doubling his vote totals in heavily Cuban-American Miami-Dade County.
Joe Biden es el candidato del Castro-chavismo.
Trump's campaign effectively likening Biden to Cuba's Fidel Castro and Venezuela's Hugo Chavez.
Our ancestors fled communist regimes, so we were not going to take any of the lies that Biden and his party were offering.
I think the two words socialism and communism in the Hispanic community mean the same thing. It's frightening, it's dictatorial, and it cost Biden.
Political consultants say the Biden campaign should have more effectively disputed that socialist label.
Is there a lesson to future candidates about the Latin vote?
I feel like the Biden campaign did what they needed to do at the bare minimum. These community groups in Florida told me they've had more money than they had ever dealt with, but they got it all in the last 3 weeks. That's the problem.
Too late.
Too late.
Joe Biden underperforming in other states too, like Texas, where in the largest Hispanic county, he won by just 5 points. Hillary Clinton had won by 60. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeting, the results sound the alarm about Democratic vulnerabilities with Latinos, and that effort hasn't been put in.
Tonight, a warning to all politicians: ignore the Latino vote at your own peril. Kerry Sanders, NBC News in Miami's Little Havana.
I'm Blaine Alexander in Georgia, where at least 200,000 votes are still outstanding.
Is this taking longer than you expected to take, and why?
Oh, no, it's really going much quicker. Every legal vote will be counted.
The Secretary of State says all hands are on deck to finish counting as early as tonight. The two counties with the most remaining still tallying votes, Fulton and DeKalb counties in metro Atlanta, a growing blue spot in a once reliably red southern state.
We are looking at two of the largest counties in the state. There also happen to be two of the blackest counties in the state of Georgia.
And the vast majority of black voters statewide back Biden, 87% compared to Trump's 11% in Georgia's exit polls. Democrats benefiting from the state's shifting demographics, where population has grown by more than 1 million over the last decade, a large percentage people of color.
But I wanted to make sure that my vote counted, and that is why I'm here.
Insay Ufat's organization, the New Georgia Project, works to get them politically engaged.
We can demystify how campaigns work, demystify how government works, and make it accessible to all.
They've registered nearly 500,000 new voters since 2014.
So like in terms of politics, like the idea that there are no safe seats is now our reality, and that people are having to work for it.
The question now, whose work paid off? Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Atlanta.
As we await the final results, we can all agree this has been an election unlike any other. We want to turn to NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Michael, try to put some perspective in all this for us.
Well, you know, Lester, we've had something we have never seen before, which is a president last night claiming re-election even before that re-election is anywhere near to being certified. But you know, people who are saying that it is unusual for us to take so long to count the ballots, most of American history that's happened. 19th century, for much of that time, an election would take days because, especially before the telegraph, it took a long time for word to spread that someone had won. 1876, there was a conflict between Hayes and Tilden. It took over 3 months to resolve until finally it was decided that Rutherford Hayes would be president. And of course, many of us remember 2000 when George W. Bush was finally declared the winner of that election by a vote of the Supreme Court. So I think anyone who says that there's anything that is out of keeping with democracy about this is looking at it the wrong way, because what history tells us is the most important thing is for the counting of the ballots not necessarily to be fast, but for it to be accurate. Our democracy depends on it. And the other thing about yesterday, huge turnout. That's a big symbol of health in a democracy.
All right. Michael, thanks very much. Amazing how things can look different when we look through the lens of history. Let's take a step back. Well, that's nightly news for this Wednesday. I'm Lester Holt. For many of you, we'll be continuing our election coverage at the top of the hour, so we hope you can stay with us for that. Good night.
This is NBC Nightly News, Decision 2020. Here is Lester Holt.
Good evening once again from our NBC News election headquarters as we follow this election cliffhanger minute by minute. NBC News now projecting that Joe Biden has won the crucial state of Michigan and that Biden is the apparent winner in Wisconsin. President Trump won both of those states 4 years ago, but this election is still far from over, and we have it all covered for you tonight. Let's go to our political director, Chuck Todd. Chuck, what's the latest here?
All right, Lester, let's go through. First, I want to remind people what we could learn tonight, right? Think about today. Today we got Michigan.
As all this news is coming in, most of it not seeming all that great for President Trump. Dana, you have some new reporting.
I talked to a source familiar with President Trump's thinking who said that the president is down, obviously tired, which is understandable, but not feeling all that great, despite the public bluster that we've seen and heard from his campaign, from his children, that the president is seeing what's happening. He is seeing that in some of these key states that will determine whether he is president or not, his lead is shrinking. Or if Joe Biden is ahead, you know, notwithstanding what we just saw, this is before that just happened, it's just not looking that good for the president. And the sense from the source that I spoke to is that the president is starting to see this slip away. That's the mood of the president. Now, could that change like this with changes in the votes? Of course. But it also kind of dovetails with some reporting that we had earlier from our colleague Kevin Liptak, who said the president is calling to allies, saying that he doesn't understand the strategy that his campaign is using to kind of have these lawsuits in various states. Why didn't they try this more aggressively before the votes were counted? So there's some hand-wringing going on behind the scenes while there is some, public bravado. It's quite different.
And I don't blame him for being confused about his legal team's strategy, because it is a little confounding when you actually look at what is going on. We've been talking all night about the way in which the strategy is talking out of one side of their mouth in Arizona and in Nevada, and then out of another in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Michigan. So it is confusing. And earlier in the year, the president really did push his team and the RNC to have a very aggressive legal strategy. And I think he really had hoped that a lot of this stuff would be resolved before we got to this point. And much of it actually had been resolved and litigated in the courts, which is why you're seeing some of the legal challenges that they're putting out now are, as we've discussed, fairly thin. And so I'm not surprised to see that the president finds it to be a somewhat unconvincing case.
But do you
for victory.
that his issue is that he's not finding their legal strategy now to be up to the standards that he wants, or he doesn't understand why they're not able to stop the counting of votes? I mean, that seems more like in keeping with Donald Trump. His legal team was fairly aggressively out there. I mean, they were trying to stop mail-in ballots in any number of states, including the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I mean, the problem is that just because he's president, he's not able just to stop mail-in ballots. He's not able just to stop the counting of ballots. I think, with all due respect, I think you're giving him a little bit too much credit.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's a little bit of both, that he wants to stop the ballots from being counted. But again, I'm sure he's not blind to the fact that these cases that are being brought are long shots.
Exactly.
I mean, they're just hard to...
But that's not his legal team's fault.
Well, no, it's not. But as we've been saying all night, they are throwing everything they can up against this wall. The president obviously wants to win. He wants the ballots to perhaps not be counted. But I think he, as someone who, as you pointed out, is very litigious, he understands that these cases are not as rock solid as he.
That's exactly right. I think that he's.
Hey everyone, this is Josh with Josh Wright Piano TV. Today we'll be doing a video segment on pearly sound. This concept was presented to me by my teacher, by other people. It really came when I was listening to the works of Murray Pariah, as he's played a lot of Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven. All those different composers present a lot of passages that require, I guess, a really light touch. What we want to do today is to go over some concepts about how we can create a pearly, light, clear, beautiful, fleeting sound. I think that's a big problem for a lot of people, is the tone quality suffers when we're caught up with technique. So how can we make both coincide? This video is in response to Carrie, who had asked specifically about the Chopin Nocturne in D-flat major, Opus 27, number 2. And anyone wanting to hear that piece, I would definitely listen to a lot of different recordings of it. I've actually recorded it. You can check it out on my website at joshwrightpiano.com. And the passage that he was asking about is the really quick passage after the final recap of the theme. And I'm just going to go ahead and play this a little bit under tempo to start out with, so we can kind of hear what we're looking at. So that passage, there's a lot of notes going on for this left hand, which actually in full tempo is more along these lines. So I'm going to go ahead and play it full tempo now. So. So how do we get kind of that lighter touch and fast fleeting notes without being heavy? I remember this is kind of how I used to play. I used to play really a little bit more connected and a little bit more heavy and muddy. I was trying to get it lighter, but I didn't know how. So it was more like, you know, and the fingers are definitely not nearly as clear. So what we want to do is, how do we get that nice pearly sound like that? I think the answer really came from me.
Зачем перебираешь ты меня, он тебя понял? Наоборот, ничего уже, видите. Никому это не надо. Не, ну это да.